Jake Morrison sat in the large council chamber and looked around at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him. Most of them looked angry or disgusted when they turned their eyes toward the human section. He had been coming to these meetings for 5 years now, and it never got any easier. The other species always treated humans like children who didn't belong at the big table. Lisa Carter sat next to him, writing notes on her tablet. She was young for a diplomatic aide, only 28, but she was smart and quick. Jake trusted her completely. Right now she was recording everything the aliens said, even though most of it was the same complaints they heard every week, the Zenthari. Representative stood up at the front podium. His name was Vex Taylor, and he was tall and thin with gray skin that looked like old leather. He always spoke in a voice that made it sound like humans were stupid insects. Today was no different. The human species continues to expand beyond what is reasonable, Vex Taylor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. They have established 12 colony worlds in just 50 years. This rate of growth threatens the stability of our established territories. Kay kept his face calm, but inside, he felt tired. 50 years sounded like a lot to humans, but most of the alien species had been around for thousands of years. They moved slowly and thought slowly. The idea that humans might want to grow and explore seemed to scare them. We propose new restrictions. Vex Taylor continued. Humanity should be limited to their current 12 worlds. Any new colonies must be approved by unanimous vote of this council. Jake heard Lisa take a sharp breath next to him. Unanimous vote meant that any single species could stop human expansion forever. It was basically a complete ban disguised as a fair rule around the chamber. Alien delegates nodded their heads or made whatever gestures their species used to show agreement. The fish-like aquarians rippled their fins. The insect-like hive mind buzzed softly. The rock people called granite lords rumbled deep in their chests. All in favor of motion 847 Delta regarding human expansion limits, Vex Taylor called out. Lights began appearing on the voting board around the chamber. Green lights for yes, red lights for no. Jake watched as green light after green light appeared. 847 green lights total. Only one red light appeared in the human section. Motion passes, Vex Taylor announced, with what Jake was sure was satisfaction. Humanity is now restricted to 12 colony worlds pending individual council approval for any expansion. Jake stood up slowly. The chamber was huge, designed to hold thousands of delegates from hundreds of species. His human voice would normally get lost in all that space, but somehow when he spoke, everyone heard him clearly. The human delegation respectfully withdraws from these proceedings, Jake said. His voice was quiet but firm. We will be departing. Council space effective immediately. The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens started talking to each other in dozens of different languages. Some laughed, thinking it was another empty threat. Others looked confused. A few looked worried, but not many. Jake had heard these kinds of threats before from other species. Usually they came back within a few months when they needed trade agreements or military protection. The galaxy was a big, dangerous place. The small species rarely survived alone for long. But Lisa saw something different in Jake's eyes. She'd worked with him long enough to know when he was bluffing and when he was serious. This was not a bluff. She quietly activated her personal communicator and sent a coded message that would reach every human world, ship, and station within hours. The message was only 3 words, but every human leader had been waiting for it. Begin silent protocol. Jake gathered his papers and walked toward the exit. Lisa followed, her heart beating fast. Behind them, the alien delegates were still, talking and laughing. Most of them thought the humans would be back before the next session. As they reached the door, Vex Taylor called out, Ambassador Morrison, surely you do not mean this dramatic gesture. Humans have benefited greatly from council membership. Jake turned back for just a moment. We certainly have, he said. We learned a great deal about who our friends are. Outside the chamber, Lisa caught up with Jake in the hallway. Sir, are we really doing this? The silent protocol? Jake nodded. We've been preparing for 2 years, Lisa, ever since it became clear that they would never accept us as equals. But, sir, leaving the council means leaving everything. Our trade agreements, Our defense treaties? Our research partnerships? No, Jake said. It means taking everything with us. Lisa didn't understand yet, but she would soon. The silent protocol wasn't just a plan to leave the council. It was a plan to take every piece of human technology, every trade relationship, every strategic advantage, and move it all beyond the reach of species who had decided that humans were too dangerous to grow freely. On Earth, President Helen Davis was already addressing the world. Her speech was calm and measured, not the angry declaration of war that some had expected. My fellow humans, she said from the Oval Office, today marks the beginning of a new chapter in human history. We go not in anger, but in hope. We go not as refugees, but as pioneers. The galaxy has made it clear that there is no room for human growth within their vision of civilization. So we will build our own, across human space. The message was spreading. On Mars, cargo ships that had been loading supplies for months suddenly went into overdrive. Factory workers who had been told they were preparing for expanded trade operations now learned the truth. They were preparing for the greatest exodus in human history. On the mining world of New Colorado, Supervisor Pete Johnson got the message and immediately understood. For 6 months, his crews had been working double shifts, mining rare metals that were supposedly going to new construction projects. Now he realized those metals were going to build something far more important than new buildings. They were going to build new worlds, Captain Julie. Winters was commanding a small fleet of ships near the edge of council space when her orders came through. Her official mission was routine patrol, but her sealed orders told a different story. She was to begin immediate evacuation of human listening posts throughout alien territory, but not before downloading every piece of intelligence they had gathered over the past 50 years. Every alien military frequency, every diplomatic channel, every trade route, every weakness and strength of every species in the Council was carefully recorded in human databases. Information that could have been shared as part of galactic cooperation was instead being packaged for humanity's private use. Dr. Amanda Falster was working late in her laboratory on the research station orbiting Titan when the message arrived. As the head of xenobiology research, she had spent 10 years studying alien life forms and sharing her discoveries with council scientists. Now she received orders to pack up every piece of research, every sample, every bit of data, prepare for immediate departure. The aliens had always assumed that humans would share their scientific discoveries freely as part of their membership. In galactic civilization, they never considered that humans might take their knowledge and go somewhere else with it. On space stations throughout human territory, similar scenes were playing out. Families who had lived their entire lives in council space received evacuation orders. Children asked their parents why they had to leave their homes. The parents explained as best they could that sometimes you had to go somewhere. God knew to be free. But this wasn't a panicked retreat. Every human who received evacuation orders also received detailed instructions about where to go and what to bring. Ships arrived exactly on schedule. Supplies were loaded according to careful plans. Nothing was left to chance. The aliens in the council chamber were still celebrating their victory over human expansion when the first reports started coming in. Human ships were leaving their stations. Human traders were canceling their contracts. Human research teams were packing up their equipment. At first, the aliens weren't worried. Humans had made dramatic gestures before. It would be back when. They realized how much they needed council protection and trade. But as the hours passed and more reports arrived, some of the smarter alien leaders began to understand that something different was happening. This wasn't a political protest. This was a permanent goodbye, and deep in space. Beyond the reach of alien sensors, the first human ships were already heading toward coordinates that existed in no council database. Humanity was going somewhere the aliens had never been, taking with them everything they had learned about their former friends and neighbors. The silent departure had begun. Admiral Kevin Torres stood on the bridge of the exploration ship. It pioneered watched the massive display screen showing human settlements across council space. Red dots marked colonies that had already been evacuated. Yellow dots showed colonies in the process of evacuation. Green dots marked colonies still waiting for their turn. In just 2 weeks, there would be no green dots left. "Admiral, the last transport from New Boston is reporting successful departure," said Lieutenant Carol Hayes from the communications station. "All civilian personnel have been evacuated. The industrial equipment is loaded and secured." Kevin nodded. New Boston had been one of the hardest evacuations because it was so close to alien worlds. The Xanthari had 3 military bases within 50 light-years. They were already asking questions about all the human ship traffic. But somehow the evacuation teams had managed to pull it off without raising too much suspicion. "What about the research stations?" Kevin asked. "Dr. Foster reports that all xenobiology data has been transferred," Carol replied. "The last of the alien specimens are being loaded onto the science vessel Darwin right now." Kevin almost smiled at that. The aliens had no idea how much humans had learned about them over the years. Every alien species that had ever visited a human research station had been studied, scanned, and analyzed. Their biology, their psychology, their weaknesses. All of it was now packed carefully in human databases, heading for destinations aliens would never find. On the industrial world of New Detroit, Pete Johnson walked through the factory floors one last time. The massive manufacturing complex had been the pride of human engineering in council space. It produced quantum processors that were used in alien computers throughout the galaxy. Most aliens didn't even know the processors came from human factories. They just knew they could buy them cheaply from human traders. "Last load is ready, boss," said his assistant, Betty Clark. She was a small woman, but tough as nails. She had been working around the clock to organize the equipment transfers. Pete looked at the empty factory floor. Just 3 weeks ago, this place had been humming with activity. Thousands of workers, hundreds of machines, all producing technology that the aliens had come to depend on. Now it was all being loaded onto ships bound for the great unknown. "They have no idea what they just lost," Pete said quietly. "Our loss is going to be their nightmare," Betty replied. "Half the computers in council space are going to stop working within 6 months without our processors?" Pete nodded. The aliens had always assumed that human technology was somehow primitive compared to their ancient civilizations. They never bothered to learn how human machines actually worked. They just bought them and used them, never thinking about what would happen if humans weren't around to maintain and replace them. Captain Fleet Winters was running the most dangerous part of the entire operation. Her job was to evacuate the human intelligence stations scattered throughout alien space without letting anyone know they existed. These stations had been gathering information on alien military activities for decades. Disguised as research outposts or trade stations, Station 7 reports successful data transfer, said her tactical officer Gary Miller. "All personnel are aboard the stealth transport Phantom." Julie looked at her star chart. Station 7 had been positioned near the hive mind territory, recording every communication that came out of their space. The bug-like aliens thought their encrypted signals were secure, but human computers had cracked their codes years ago. Now, all that intelligence was being carefully packaged and taken to wherever humanity was planning to build their new home. "About Station 12? Julie asked. "Still working on it," Gary replied. "That one is tricky because it's right in the middle of a Xanthari patrol route. We need to wait for the right moment." Station 12 was the most valuable intelligence post humans had ever built. It was positioned where it could intercept communications from 6 different alien species, including the council leadership itself. The amount of classified information stored there was incredible. Military plans, diplomatic secrets, economic data, all of it had been flowing into human databases for years. Julie knew that if the aliens ever found out how much humans knew about their private business, they would declare war immediately. But by the time they figured it out, humans would be long gone. All that intelligence would be helping humanity build a civilization that could defend itself against any threat. Dr. Amanda Foster was working feverishly in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Darwin. Around her, teams of scientists were packing up decades of research on alien biology. Every alien species that had ever agreed to medical scans or biological studies was represented in these files. "Doctor, the Xanthari DNA samples are secured," said her research assistant, Craig Wilson. "The Aquarian tissue cultures are in stasis. The Granite Lord mineral analysis is complete. Amanda nodded as she carefully sealed a container holding samples from 12 different alien species. This information would be invaluable if humans ever needed to develop biological weapons, though she hoped it would never come to that. More importantly, it would help human doctors treat any diseases they might encounter from alien contact in the future. What about the psychological profiles? Amanda asked. All loaded, Craig replied. Every personality test, every behavioral study, every cultural analysis we've ever done. Amanda felt a little guilty about that part. Many aliens had volunteered for human psychological studies because they thought it would help promote understanding between species. They never imagined that humans were learning exactly how to manipulate and control them if necessary. On the farming world of New Kansas, agricultural specialist Nancy Adams was overseeing the evacuation of human farming technology. The aliens had been amazed by human farming techniques, which could grow twice as much food using half the resources of traditional alien agriculture. The seed banks are loaded, reported her supervisor, Frank Turner. All the genetic samples, all the breeding records, everything. Nancy looked across the empty fields where human crops had once grown. These fields had fed millions of aliens throughout Council space. Human food was cheaper and more nutritious than anything the aliens could grow themselves. But the aliens had never bothered to learn how human farming actually worked. They just bought the food and ate it. They're going to be very hungry soon, Nancy said. That's their problem now, Frank replied. Maybe next time they'll think twice before trying to limit a species that's feeding half the galaxy. Economic analyst Roy Patterson was completing the most complex part of the entire operation from his office on Europa. For 2 years, he had been quietly withdrawing human investments from alien companies and markets. It had to be done slowly and carefully so that no one would notice until it was too late. The last of the banking transfers are complete, reported his assistant Ellen Price. All human assets have been converted and transferred to the fleet. Roy looked at his final calculations. Human economic activity represented nearly 30% of all trade in Council space. Human banks held loans worth trillions of credits. Throughout the galaxy, human investment companies owned stakes in thousands of alien businesses. How bad is this going to be for them? Ellen asked. Complete economic collapse within 6 months, Roy replied. Most alien governments will be bankrupt. Within a year, their entire financial system was built on the assumption that humans would always be there to provide stability and growth. On the military base orbiting Pluto, General Lucy Stone was coordinating the most sensitive evacuations of all. Human military advisors were embedded with alien forces throughout Council space, supposedly to promote cooperation and understanding. In reality, they had been studying alien military capabilities and looking for weaknesses. The last advisor team has reported successful extraction, said Colonel Mike Davis. All classified materials have been secured. Lucy nodded. Those advisors had learned everything there was to know about alien military technology, tactics, and strategies. They knew which species were strong and which were weak. They knew which alliances were real and which were just political theater. Most importantly, they knew exactly how to defeat any alien military force if it ever became necessary. What about our own military assets? Lucy asked. All human military equipment has been evacuated or destroyed, Mike replied. We're not leaving them anything they can study or copy. The aliens had always assumed that human military technology was inferior to their own. They'd never been in a real war with humans, so they didn't know what human weapons could actually do. That ignorance might be very costly for them someday. As the great evacuation continued, reports kept flowing in. From across human space, factories were empty, research stations were abandoned, trade posts were closed. Everywhere humans had once lived and worked, there was now only silence. But it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a species that had decided to take their destiny into their own hands. Humanity was leaving Council space, but they were taking with them every advantage they had ever gained, every secret they had ever learned, and every piece of technology they had ever developed. 3 months had passed since the humans left Council space, and Zephyrian Clix was starting to panic. She was the chief economist for the Galactic Council, and the numbers on her screen were getting worse every day.
Ford had started as minor.
Trade disruptions was turning into the worst economic crisis in galactic history. The manufacturing sector is down 60%, she reported to the Emergency Council session. Food production has dropped by 40%. Transportation networks are failing across 12 sectors. The council chamber was half empty now. Many species had stopped sending representatives because they were too busy dealing with crises at home. The ones who remained looked tired and frightened. Council Prime Vextalar, who had been so confident when he proposed the human restrictions, now sat hunched in his chair like an old man. "Surely this is temporary," said the Aquarian delegate, his fins rippling with nervousness. "The humans will return when they realize they need us." Safarian looked at her data again and shook her head. "I don't think they need us at all. In fact, I'm starting to think we needed them more than we ever realized." On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, factory manager Jorth was facing his worst nightmare. His production lines had been shut down for 2 weeks because the quantum processors that ran his machines had stopped working. The replacement parts he needed were manufactured exclusively by human companies, and those companies were gone. "Can't we just buy the processors from someone else?" asked his assistant, a young Zenthari named Kex. Jorth made a sound that was like a laugh but without any humor. "There is no one else. The humans were the only ones who knew how to make them. We just bought them and used them. We never bothered to learn how they actually worked." Kex looked confused. "But surely our scientists can figure it out." "Our scientists have been trying for 3 months," Jorth replied. "They can't even understand the basic principles. Human technology is apparently much more advanced than we thought." The same scene was playing out on worlds throughout Council space. Machines that had worked perfectly for decades were breaking down, and no one knew how to fix them. Computers that had processed data for alien governments were failing. Communication systems that had connected the galaxy were going silent. On the agricultural world of Fertile Delta, Aquarian farmer Splish was watching his crops die. For 20 years, he had used human farming techniques that had tripled his harvest. But the techniques required special seeds and fertilizers that were made by human companies. Without them, his crops were failing. "Maybe we can go back to the old ways," suggested his neighbor, Splash. Splish rippled his fins sadly. "The old ways fed barely half our population. If we can't figure out how to grow food like the humans did, millions of our people will starve." Across the galaxy, similar disasters were unfolding. The Mythilic Federation's food distribution network had collapsed because it depended on human logistics software. The proud Zenthari military was discovering that their most advanced warships couldn't leave port because their FTL drives used human-designed components that were now impossible to replace. In the council chamber, Ambassador Vera Collins sat alone in the human embassy section. She was the only human diplomat left in council space, and her job was to politely refuse the increasingly desperate requests for negotiations that arrived every day. Ambassador Collins called out Council Prime Vextalar during the daily session. "Surely your government can be reasonable. We are willing to discuss more favorable terms for humanity." Vera stood up slowly. She was a calm woman in her 50s who had been chosen for this job because she could stay polite even when aliens were being rude. "I'm sorry, Prime Vextalar, but I have no authority to negotiate anything. My instructions are to forward all requests to the appropriate channels." "And what are those channels?" Vextalar asked desperately. "An automated message system that will respond within 6 to 8 months, Vera replied. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. 6 to 8 months was a lifetime when your civilization was falling apart. But Vera just sat back down and continued reading her book, ignoring the chaos around her. Intelligence analyst Kyle Rogers was watching the alien communications from his hidden base near the edge of council space. His job was to monitor how the aliens were reacting to humanity's departure. And the results were both fascinating and terrifying. "They're starting to panic," he reported to his supervisor via encrypted communication. "Their entire exploration fleet to search for us. The Aquarians are offering trade concessions that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. The hive mind is actually considering surrendering some of their territory in exchange for resumed Trade. Any sign that they're figuring out where we went? Asked his supervisor. Kyle laughed. They're looking in all the wrong places. They're searching systems that are still on their star charts. They have no idea we've gone beyond the galactic rim. Had been the genius of humanity's evacuation plan? While the aliens were searching known space, humanity had used secret routes through uncharted regions to reach destinations that didn't exist in any Council database. The galaxy was vast, but the Council had only explored a tiny fraction of it. Humanity had gone to the parts they had never even dreamed of visiting. Dr. Marie Lewis was perhaps the most important human still in Council space. She was a xenopsychologist who had been studying alien behavior for 15 years. And now she was documenting the psychological impact of humanity's departure on alien societies. They're exhibiting classic signs of abandonment trauma, she wrote. In her secret report, species that spent centuries viewing themselves as superior to humans are now confronting the possibility that they were completely dependent on us. The Xanthari were the worst affected. Their entire culture was built around being the strongest and most advanced species in the galaxy. Discovering that their military depended on human technology was destroying their sense of identity. Some Xanthari warriors had committed ritual suicide. Rather than face the shame of their weakness, the Aquarians were having a different kind of crisis. They had always prided themselves on being the most intelligent species in the Council. But now they couldn't figure out how to replicate even basic human technologies. Their greatest scientists were working around the clock trying to understand human quantum processors, and they were failing completely. It's like they're experiencing collective cognitive dissonance, Marie wrote. They can't accept that the young species they looked down on was actually more advanced than they were. Search fleets were getting more desperate. Captain Xelox of the Hegemony commanded the largest search operation in galactic history. 12 species had contributed ships to track down the missing humans, but they were finding nothing but empty space. Expand the search to Sector 7749, Xelox ordered his navigator. Sir, that sector is marked as unexplored, the navigator replied. There are no habitable worlds there, according to our charts. Our charts are obviously incomplete, Xelox said grimly. The humans knew something we didn't. But even as the search fleets pushed deeper into unknown space, they were hampered by their own technological limitations. Many of their ships were breaking down because they couldn't get replacement parts for human-made components. The irony was bitter. They needed human technology to find the humans who had taken that technology away. On the Council homeworld, the economic collapse was accelerating. Banks were failing because they had invested heavily in human companies that no longer existed. Stock markets were crashing as investors realized that entire industries depended on human suppliers who were gone forever. The unemployment rate was approaching 30% across Council space. Factories couldn't operate without human parts. Farms couldn't grow food without human techniques. Transportation networks couldn't function without human logistics systems. We need to consider emergency measures, suggested the Granite Lord Delegate, his rocky voice echoing through the chamber. Perhaps we should declare martial law to maintain order. But even martial law would be difficult to enforce when the military's equipment was failing. Xanthari had already lost 3 warships to system failures. The Aquarian fleet was grounded because their navigation computers had crashed. The hive mind couldn't coordinate their forces because their communication network relied on human-designed quantum relays. As the crisis deepened, some species began to blame each other. The Xanthari accused the Aquarians of being too dependent on human technology. The Aquarians blamed the Granite Lords for not developing better alternatives. Old rivalries that had been kept in check by Council diplomacy began to resurface.
This
is exactly what the humans predicted would happen, Vera Collins observed as she watched the Council session descend into chaos. They said that restricting their growth would destabilize the galaxy. We just didn't listen. The truth was becoming clear to everyone. Humanity hadn't just been members of galactic civilization. They had been the foundation that held it all together. Their technology, their trade, their innovation, their diplomatic skills, all of it had been keeping the galaxy functioning smoothly. And now they were gone, taking everything with them, leaving behind a civilization that was discovering. just how much it had depended on the species it had tried to control. 2 years had passed since humanity's departure, and Captain Xelox was running out of hope. His search fleet had explored hundreds of star systems, followed every possible lead, and investigated every rumor of human activity. They had found nothing but empty space and broken dreams. "Sir, the Zenith has reported another engine failure," announced his communications officer. "That's the 5th ship this month. Okay, the human-made FTL cores are burning out faster than we can replace them." Xelox stared at the star map on his bridge display. Red markers showed all the systems they had searched. There were so many red markers now that they covered half the known galaxy, but still no sign of humanity. "How many ships do we have left that can still make long-range jumps?" he asked. 17, sir. Down from 43 when we started." Xelox felt old and tired. The greatest search operation in galactic history was falling apart because they couldn't maintain their own ships without human technology. The irony was painful, but he couldn't give up. Too much depended on finding the humans and convincing them to return. On the Council homeworld, things were getting worse every day. Council Prime Vextiller had aged 10 years in the past too. His once proud bearing was now bent with worry and shame. The Xanthari had always been the strongest species in the galaxy, but now they were reduced to begging for help that might never come. "The food riots on Kepler Prime have spread to 6 more worlds," reported his aide during the daily crisis meeting. "The Aquarian Federation is considering withdrawing from the Council entirely. 3 more systems have declared independence, rather than share their remaining resources." Vex Taylor closed his eyes. The great galactic civilization that had stood for thousands of years was crumbling in just 2 short years. All because they had been too proud to let one species grow freely. "Any response from the human ambassador?" we asked without much hope. "The same automated message, sir. All requests will be processed in the order received. Current waiting time is 8 to 12 months. Senator Blake Cooper was the loneliest man in the galaxy. As the only human maintaining any kind of official presence in council space, he spent his days in an empty embassy building, filing reports that nobody read and answering questions he couldn't answer. Senator Cooper called the Aquarian delegate. As Blake walked through the council halls, "Please, surely you have some way to contact your leaders? My people are starving. Our food production systems have completely failed without human agricultural techniques." Blake stopped and turned to face the desperate alien. 3 months ago, this same Aquarian had voted to restrict human expansion. Now he was begging for human help. "I'm sorry," Blake said gently. "I truly am, but I have no more contact with human leadership than you do. I'm just here to maintain the embassy and forward messages." "But your people must have some compassion," the Aquarian pleaded. "We made mistakes, yes, but surely they won't let entire worlds starve." Blake felt genuinely sad for the alien. "I don't think humanity wishes any species to suffer. But I also don't think they're coming back to save civilizations that voted to limit their growth." Dr. Carl Newman was documenting the strangest psychological phenomenon he had ever witnessed. As an anthropologist, he had spent his career studying how societies reacted to crisis. He had never seen anything like what was happening to the alien species. "The Xanthari warrior caste is experiencing what can only be described as species-wide depression," he wrote in his encrypted report. "Their entire identity was built around being the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Discovering that their weapons don't work without human components has shattered their core beliefs about themselves. The hive mind was having an even stranger reaction. Their collective consciousness had always prided itself on perfect logical thinking. But the humans' departure had revealed so many flaws in their logic that parts of the hive mind were actually disagreeing with other parts. Some drone clusters were developing independent thoughts, which was supposed to be impossible. The psychological damage may be permanent, Carl wrote. These species may never recover their previous sense of superiority and confidence. But the most interesting data was coming from Kyle Rogers at his monitoring station. The intelligence. Analyst had been tracking alien communications for 2 years, and recently he had picked up something amazing. "You're not going to believe this," Kyle reported to his superiors. "The aliens aren't just looking for us in this galaxy anymore. Started sending long-range probes to nearby galaxies. They're spending resources they don't have on a search that's becoming more desperate every day. His supervisor's voice crackled over the encrypted channel. Any chance they'll actually find us? Kyle laughed. Not unless they get very lucky. They're still thinking like council species, looking for habitable worlds and established trade routes. They have no idea that we've built an entirely new kind of civilization. Meanwhile, far beyond the galactic rim, where no alien had ever traveled, Commander Susan Taylor was overseeing humanity's greatest achievement. Nuterra wasn't just a planet, it was the heart of a growing human empire that spanned 3 star systems and was expanding every month. The shipyards in the Prometheus system are ahead of schedule, reported her aide, Lieutenant Danny Rodriguez. We'll have 50 new exploration vessels ready for launch next month. Susan looked out at the construction happening around Nuterra. Massive space stations, mining operations, research facilities, and military bases were growing faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity wasn't just surviving their exodus. They were thriving in ways that would have been impossible under Council oversight. What about contact with the other species? Susan asked. The Wanderers are very interested in trade agreements. Danny replied, the stellar nomads want to share star charts. The free traders are offering to teach us about galactic currencies we've never heard of. This was perhaps the most shocking discovery humanity had made. Beyond the galactic rim, there were dozens of species that had never joined the Council. Some were more advanced than anything in Council space. Others had technologies that worked on completely different principles. All of them were eager to trade and cooperate with the humans who had rejected galactic civilization. The Council always told us they represented all intelligent life in the galaxy, Susan mused. Turns out they only knew about a tiny fraction of what's actually out here. Back in Council space, the search fleets were getting more desperate and more dangerous. Some captains were taking their ships into uncharted nebulae and black hole systems, hoping to find some trace of human passage. 3 ships had been lost in the past month to navigation hazards. We need to expand the search parameters, Captain Xylox announced during a fleet commander's meeting. The humans obviously know about regions of space that we've never explored. With respect, we're already pushing our ships beyond safe limits, replied Captain Nex of the Aquarian fleet. Half my vessels are held together with emergency repairs. Can't keep this up much longer. Xylox knew Nex was right, but he also knew that returning to Council space empty-handed would be political suicide. The aliens needed to find humanity, or at least find some proof that humanity still existed and might eventually be willing to negotiate. One more sweep, Xylox decided. We'll try the Outer Rim territories that were marked as uninhabitable. What Xylox didn't know was that those territories had been marked as uninhabitable by aliens who didn't have human technology. Humanity had found ways to live and thrive in places the Council had written off as impossible. Asteroid fields that aliens couldn't navigate became human mining operations. Radiation-soaked systems that aliens couldn't survive became human research stations. Regions of space that aliens considered empty wastelands became the highways of a new human empire. On the Council homeworld, Ambassador Vera Collins was receiving visitors every day. Alien diplomats, military leaders, and even ordinary citizens came to the human embassy begging for any kind of contact with humanity. The building had become a shrine to lost hope. Please, said an elderly Zinthari woman who had traveled across the galaxy to reach the embassy. My grandson is sick. The medical machines that could save him were made by humans. Can't you help us get replacement parts? Vera felt her heart break a little more. She had seen hundreds of these cases. Aliens suffering because the technology they depended on was failing. But her instructions were clear. She could only forward messages and hope that someday someone in human leadership might read them. Add your request to the queue, Vera said gently. I wish I could do more. As the woman left, Vera wondered if humanity would ever return to Council space. Part of her hoped they would because the suffering was becoming unbearable to watch. But another part of her understood why they had left and why they might never come back. The galaxy had taught humanity that they weren't welcome as equals. So humanity had gone somewhere else to become something the galaxy could never control again. And with each passing day, The gap between what humanity had become and what the Council remembered was growing wider. The aliens were searching for the humans they used to know, but those humans no longer existed. 5 years had passed since humanity's silent departure, and the Galactic Council chamber looked like a shadow of its former self. Where once hundreds of proud alien delegates had debated the fate of the galaxy, now barely 50 representatives gathered to discuss simple survival. Many species had withdrawn from the Council entirely. Their governments too busy dealing with collapsed economies and failing infrastructure to care about galactic politics council. Prime Vex Taylor sat in his chair and looked older than his 800 years. His gray skin had become almost white with stress, and his once commanding voice now shook when he spoke. The great Xanthari, warrior who had been so confident about restricting human growth, was now a broken leader of a dying civilization. The casualty reports from Sector 12, he said quietly to his aide. 17 worlds have lost more than half their population to starvation, sir. The medical crisis on Aquarian Prime has claimed 3 million lives. The hive mind reports that 12 of their colony clusters have gone completely silent. Staler closed his eyes. In 5 years, the galaxy had lost more beings to economic collapse and infrastructure failure than it had lost in the last 1,000 years of wars. It's all because they had been too proud to let humans grow freely. Then something happened that no one expected. The communication board at the front of the chamber lit up with an incoming message. But this wasn't a desperate plea from another failing world. The signal strength and encryption patterns were unlike anything the Council had seen in years. This is Danny Rodriguez, Communications Officer of the Human Federation vessel Endeavor, requesting permission to dock at Council Station Alpha. The chamber erupted in chaos. Aliens jumped to their feet, shouting questions and demands. Some laughed with relief, others wept openly. After 5 years of silence, humanity was making contact. But Vextalor noticed something important in the message. The human hadn't said he was requesting permission to return to the Council. He had said he was representing something called the Human Federation, and he was asking permission to dock like any foreign government would. An hour later, Ambassador Christine Park walked into the Council chamber, and everything about her presence announced that the galaxy had changed forever. She wore a crisp uniform decorated with insignia that no Council member recognized. Her bearing was confident and professional. But there was something in her eyes that spoke of experiences beyond anything the aliens could imagine. Behind her walked 2 aides carrying documents and data tablets. Their technology looked more advanced than anything in the chamber, sleek and powerful in ways that made the alien equipment seem primitive by comparison. Honored delegates, Christine said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. I bring greetings from the Human Federation and its governing council. We understand that you have been experiencing some difficulties since our departure. The understatement was so massive that several aliens actually laughed bitterly. Difficulties didn't begin to describe the complete collapse of galactic civilization. We have come to discuss the possibility of limited trade relations between our governments, Christine continued. But first, let me clarify the current situation so there are no misunderstandings. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The aliens gasped as they saw a 3-dimensional map of space that extended far beyond anything in their databases. Hundreds of star systems glowed with markers indicating human settlements, research stations, and industrial facilities. Human Federation currently encompasses 412 star systems across 3 galactic clusters, Christine announced. Our population has grown to 27 billion humans, supported by advanced technology and abundant resources. Vex Taylor felt his heart sink. When humanity had left Council space, they had controlled 12 worlds with a population of 8 billion. In 5 years, they had more than tripled their population and expanded to more systems than most alien species controlled after centuries of growth. How is this possible? Whispered the Aquarian delegate. Christine smiled. When you're not restricted by artificial limits and bureaucratic oversight, growth tends to accelerate significantly. She touched her control pad, and the display changed. To show technological achievements, space stations larger than anything the Council had ever built. ships that dwarfed the greatest alien vessels, manufacturing capabilities that could produce more goods in a month than most council worlds produced in a year. But perhaps most importantly, Christine continued, we have established diplomatic and trade relations with 47 species that exist beyond the galactic rim. Species that your council never knew existed because you never bothered to explore beyond your established territories. The chamber fell completely silent. The council had always believed they represented all intelligent life in the galaxy. The idea that there were dozens of advanced species they had never contacted was devastating to their sense of importance. We're here today because some of these new allies have expressed interest in establishing trade with council species, Christine said. However, they have concerns about the stability and reliability of your governments. It was the ultimate insult, delivered with perfect diplomatic politeness. Alien species that the council had never heard of were questioning whether council civilizations were advanced enough to be trustworthy trade partners. What are your terms? Taylor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Christine activated. Another display showing a formal treaty document. The Human Federation is prepared to offer limited trade agreements to council species that meet certain criteria. First, formal recognition of human sovereignty over our current territories and acknowledgement of our right to unlimited expansion. Several alien delegates started to object, but Christine held up her hand. Second, complete autonomy for all human activities. No council oversight, no bureaucratic interference, no attempts to regulate or restrict human actions in any way. Surely some coordination would be beneficial, suggested the Granite Lord representative. Coordination is possible between equals, Christine replied. But the relationship between the Human Federation and the Council is no longer one of equals. We are the stronger power now, and we will be treated as such. The aliens looked at each other in shock. The young species they had once dismissed as junior partners was now dictating terms to them like a conquering empire. Third, Christine continued, all trade will be conducted according to human standards and regulations. Our technology, our currency, our rules, council species that wish to trade with us will adapt to our systems, not the other way around. If we refuse these terms, asked the hive mind representative, Christine shrugged. Then you continue as you have for the past 5 years. We have no need to trade with you. Your economies collapsed without us, but our economy grew beyond all expectations without you. We're offering this opportunity because our new allies think it might be beneficial, not because we need anything from you. The truth of that statement hung in the air like a physical weight. The aliens needed human technology to survive, but humans had built a thriving civilization that didn't need the council at all. Taylor looked around the chamber at the desperate faces of his fellow delegates. Some were angry, others were humiliated, but most just looked tired and defeated. They had gambled that humanity would need them more than they needed humanity. They had lost that bet completely. We need time to consider your proposal, Vextalar said. Of course, Christine replied. Take all the time you need. The Human Federation has been patient for 5 years. We can be patient a little longer. But as she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Christine delivered one final message that would haunt the council for years to come. I should mention that this offer has a limited time frame. The Human Federation is expanding rapidly, and we're establishing new trade relationships constantly. Every month we delay, our need for council trade becomes smaller, I would suggest. You decide quickly before the opportunity disappears entirely. She walked out of the chamber, leaving behind aliens who finally understood the full magnitude of their mistake. They had tried to limit humanity's growth because they feared human potential. Instead, they had created exactly the scenario they had hoped to prevent. Humanity was now the dominant power in this region of space, and the former council masters were reduced to begging for the privilege of serving as junior trade partners. The vote was unanimous. Every single delegate voted to accept humanity's terms, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The species that had once sat at the top of galactic civilization now found themselves at the bottom, grateful for whatever scraps of trade the humans might throw their way. As the final votes were recorded, Taylor couldn't help but think about the council session 5 years ago when they had voted to restrict human expansion If they could have seen this moment then, would they have voted differently? But it was too late for regrets. The galaxy had taught humanity a hard lesson about the price of being underestimated. Now it was the aliens' turn to learn what it cost. To lose something precious through their own arrogance and fear. The age of alien dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun.